Hello everybody, Raspberry Barrel here, and we're back today to read the next part of the biography of Alexandra Butterfly by Mewni Historian on DeviantArt. And we did get delayed a little last week because Jig's Selena biography came out, but now we're back to continue the story of Alexandra. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, then go check that out. And so, nothing else to say, let's begin. Please forgive me if I stutter, hesitate, or mispronounce anything, and for any noises in the background. Alexandra was a little confused why her wand was so different from her mother's, but Glossric explained that the wand was an extension of its user, hence why it changed the way it did, and that when one day she passes on the wand, it will change again. Alexandra would develop more elaborate spells than her mother, since times were different than when her mother practiced magic. She easily mastered levitation magic and basic blasts, and began incorporating her imagination into her spells. A famous spell was svtfoe avia, a spell which summoned a blast of miniature flying pigs, one of the few spells that survived the unfortunate burning of the future castle. As for the book, Alexandra was fascinated to read about her mother's accounts during the war, her own personal experiences and thoughts. She would read under the apple tree in the main garden, and would even write her own experiences for years to come. The next year, in 1004 BS, Alexandra went through puberty. While getting dressed, Leanne noticed yellow hearts on Alexandra's back, but she thought since she was magical, maybe she could control it, and they had important visitors that day, the other leaders, and their kids. When she saw pines, her hearts doubled, completely encasing her limbs, and that's when her mother saw it. They tried to get her to the bunker, but the cocooning phase took place before they got there, and they had to evacuate the city. However, it was too late. By the end of the day, everything returned to normal, except for the traumatic memories. In late fall of 1003 BS, Alexandra was out with her friends Maple and Leanne, both also having gone through puberty, and they were greeted by a large creak in the ground. From it emerged a demon of the name of Alistair Lucitor, the brother of the king Beelzebub Lucitor. The girls were horrified by the creature they saw, who began to look at them lustfully. The end result was the 3 girls literally beating him back into the underworld. When the army of demons was faced with the fury of both Mo's all-powerful magic and Alexandra's wand magic, a peace treaty was formed between Queen Mo and King Beelzebub. In early 1002 BS, Alexandra was surprised when her brother Zim wanted sword training. A couple of Selenes before, with the demons, both Alexandra and Red fought with their mother, while Zim stayed behind. Her brother always had health issues, but he didn't care. Plus, he was extremely bored since he basically read everything about everything. Her brother did end up being pretty good at fighting, despite showing no interest before beyond self-defense. A couple years later, in the tournament in 1000 BS, Zim actually beat Alexandra, but he did lose to their brother Red, who won the tournament for the 3rd time in a row. In 1000 BS, Glossric decided to teach her wandless magic, sorcery. While it was hard, it was worth the payoff. Alexandra would go off and teach this to her 2 friends, Maple and Leanne. While Maple did develop her magic, she was more of a fighter than a sorceress. Leanne, on the other hand, was a natural. Once, when Alexandra had shown Glossric how far Leanne came, he asked if the 2 were sisters. Though Alexandra still used her wand, she did learn to rely on using her own inner magic as well from time to time, though she was still years away from her mother's level. In 999 BS, Alexandra and her 2 brothers took a trip without their mother to visit the city of Arcadia, the first human city ever. The 3 siblings went to see their mother's old tower, where she lived decades ago in the first years. They were in amazement at how different it was in the comparison to the tower they grew up in, finding all sorts of journals with her personal experiences with ruling during the first years and dealing with the monsters, something they hadn't dealt with yet, but soon would. In 998 BS, Alexandra expected to be crowned queen, but felt guilty since her brothers didn't get a crown. That night, before her coronation and birthday, her mother told her plan to create 10 kingdoms, and Alexandra was more than happy about it, recalling how difficult her mother had it to manage so many people in the beginning. So she found it hard to contain herself during the next day, almost spoiling the surprise to her brothers. That day, she stood with her brothers as rulers of Mewni, and couldn't be happier about it. Not even the presence of pines could ruin her smile. However, the next day, while on a carriage ride to visit the city of Arcadia, as that's where she would begin her rule, she received a visit from lizard men of the name Karub. His group of Septarians killed her guards and almost her. She was able to escape by using a hallucination spell that made the Septarian think each other was their enemy and attack each other. But she vowed that, like her mother before her, she would never bend to their will. Alexandra reading the Book of Spells. Alexandra decided to stay in Thamor till the next year, as it was the first time she actually saw death up close and she was still shaken up. In the spring of 997 BS, after her brother Red's 18th birthday, she and her brothers were getting ready to move to their ruling cities. She asked her friend Leanne if she wanted to come with her, but Leanne said no and went over and held hands with Zim. The two admitted to have been in a relationship for close to a year. While the family was surprised, the two were undeniably happy. Alexandra felt alone her first couple weeks in Arcadia, as she knew absolutely no one there, and it was the first time she had no roommate, minus Glosric in the book of course. She would have a couple of boyfriends throughout the years, but none were really permanent. For the next 2 years, things were rather quiet. The only exciting thing was her attending the wedding of Zim and Leanne, the first royal wedding in history. This took place in the winter of 996 BS. She saw how happy the two were, though they were only 17 and 22. Leanne personally assured Alexandra she wasn't forcing Zim to do anything. During a grand summit later that year, Alexandra noticed something. The summit itself was to discuss the matter of the last names, to better distinguish individuals and help keep track of records in future times. She saw that her brother Red was real chummy with Queen Lapis's younger sister Jade, who was about 2 years older than her brother. When she confronted her brother at the end of the summit, he admitted the two had started dating, and Alexandra was happy for her brother. The year 995 BS was big for Alexandra. First was the establishment of the royal houses on Independence Day. Her and her brothers would take the names of their cheek emblems as their last names: Butterfly, Firefly, and Dragonfly. Lapis's family took the name Lazuli, which meant deep blue in their language at the time. This included her sister. Charlotte took the name Spiderbite in reference to the forest she then lived in and would reign over. Carrie took the name Robin to honor her deceased older brother. Osiris took Denial, meaning the river, as a reference to the river they traveled by and his family protected. Timber took mountains, cause that's where his family was setting beyond. Odin took Johansson, meaning child of John, in honor of his deceased father. And lastly, Ash would use Phoenix as his last name, as it was the legendary bird that saved his life. Not long after that, her brother Red sprouted wings at the age of 21, and for guys, as soon as they came in, they could learn sorcery, and Alexandra, as well as their mother, was excited Red gained the gifts of magic like them. Soon enough in summer, Zim as well, and he was still 18 at the time. Like their sister, they caught on quickly. By the end of the year, Red and Zim were master sorcerers, advancing faster than most. They were the first generation magic users from the first use of magic, so it made sense. Soon all three received training from their mother, Saint Mo, and even Glosric, to achieve their ultimate magic form, something only Mo achieved. It was hard work, and the three would need it for what was to come. In spring of 994 BS, Alexandra received a message that while the Mountains family was exploring a new valley, they were ambushed by an army of monsters. Many lives were lost, including her friend Maple. She wept over the loss of her friend and traveled to the Mountains Kingdom for the funeral. Every royal was there, including Saint Mo. While paying respects to her friend, she saw pines in a state she had never seen before. The two reminisced over the times the two argued, and Maple tried to bring peace. The next morning, Alexandra awoke to the sun rays hitting her face. She was in her room in one of the royal guest houses, and she had a splitting headache. When she turned away from the sun, she was greeted by the face of Pines, who woke up to the sound of her screaming. The two were not only in bed together, but naked as well. And then pieces of the night before came to them, and it only made the expression on their faces worse. Alexandra quickly put on her dress and left, swearing if he ever brought it up, she would annihilate him. Alexandra stopped by Thamor on her way back to Arcadia, and there was a message specifically for the Queen from the monster later Karub. He was the Septarian who attacked her years earlier, and was responsible for the ruffians who kidnapped her brother and Leanne many years before that. It stated that if the Mewmons did not stop invading, that the monsters would retaliate. When she finished reading it, the areas she touched flamed up and incinerated the letter. She laughed and claimed that the Mewmons would not be intimidated. Alexandra and Pines' first night together in 994 BS. By summer, the first major battle took place on the hill lands where the Phoenix Kingdom was. While the last war ended 35 years ago, the Mewmons never went soft, as there were still monster attacks, and they had an army to help defend the towns and villages that had popped up all over their lands. The Phoenix Kingdom bordered the Forest of Certain Death, which is where the monsters lived, so it suffered the most attacks and were the most prepared. With a little help of battle advice from svtfoe, things didn't escalate for a while. But Alexandra didn't let her soldiers fight alone, and neither her brothers or the other royals. Their parents fought for the right of humanity, and now it was their turn to defend the land that they fought hard for. Alexandra and the others fought with swords and magic, and with more magic users than the past war, it didn't look like this war was going to last very long. King Ash inherited his father's metal magic, but also had fire magic as well. By using a combination of both, he developed a way to enchant metal so that it would remain as hot as the day it was forged for years. This took a lot of energy to make, so we could only make a few, but they were incredibly useful and helpful. This enchanted metalwork would be a Phoenix family signature for centuries to come. Many other families would develop signature magic like this. Alexandra and the other royals fought side by side with their soldiers, and by the start of 993 BS, the loss of soldiers was very low, which was very good, but things would soon turn. Most of the forces were held up in the lush regions of the Forest of Unlikely Spider Bites and the Jade Morass above it, since they were across from the Forest of Certain Death, where most of the monster forces were held. However, this left certain areas with a lower defense, like the areas in the valleys past the Ursa and Atlas Mountains. In one night, all the villages and towns were destroyed by a force of thousands of monsters. Monsters that had never been seen before, not even during Mo's time. While only a small percentage of those living in that region were lost, it was still too high to be ignored. Not to mention all that hard work put into establishing the mountain's kingdom was gone. Alexandra wondered how there were so many monsters, as they seemed to double overnight, literally. But she couldn't focus on that specifically, and had to worry about the fact they had twice as many monsters to deal with, and leading them was the indestructible Septarians. She looked at her mother's research, but there was nothing about destroying one of those. Only thing close was to scatter the remains after incinerating them, but she never gave up, and neither did her brothers or friends, just like their parents before them, and they took the land back before a week of fighting. In 992 BS, Alexandra developed a spell that changed things. Its name was the Mirror Force in modern Mewman. While the incantation has been lost to time, its effects were the stuff of legend. During battle, Alexandra would hold her mirror wand high and set her incantation. Then the mirror would glow and blast over a large cloud of smoke, and when it cleared, there were glass replicates of all those caught in the mirror's gaze. When the incantation was spoken, that were under her control. While these were easily shattered and the spell draining, it drastically reduced the number of Mewmons' lives lost. During battle in midsummer, Alexandra saw her brother Zim in danger, and in that moment of sisterly protection, she dipped down and her butterfly form revealed itself. She lost her armor, but gained a gorgeous variation of her daily dress. Shades of yellow and green mixed together, and she gained 4 extra arms and a nice pair of antennae. With her increased magic, Alexandra used it to not only save her brother, but win the battle. Soon, she was able to dip at will, and her sorcery was stronger as well. By the start of winter, her brothers had managed to achieve their own ultimate magic forms, and with that, she was starting to feel like the tides were turning back in their favor. Alexandra casting the Mirror Force. In summer of that year, Ara personally led the charge against Alexandra's forces. She charged in on a unicorn. Alexandra with the same speed as Pines, and the two made eye contact. While they didn't act upon the events following Maple's death years ago, they both knew their feelings went further back than that, back to their teens. They shook heads in a silent agreement, knowing they would no longer keep it their charade after that day. But when dusk hit, Alexandra saw Pines falling to the ground with a knife in his back, and Karab standing behind him, smirking as he eyed Alexandra. She screamed in pain and anger, and her marks glowed and expelled an aura that blasted Karab away from Pines, and she made her way to Pines and saw he was still alive, her mark still glowing, and she healed his injury, and they both smiled. She then looked at Karab, and something inside of her began to take over. A moment later, Alexandra morphed into her butterfly form, emblems still glowing, and her brother's emblems glowed as well, and they involuntarily morphed as well. When Alexandra flew high into the air as dusk began to end, and her brothers flew up with her, and their auras intensified, becoming stars up high in the darkening sky. What happened next will forever echo throughout history. As if run by instincts, the three siblings outstretched their arms, and their auras glowed even bigger. The moment dusk turned to night, their auras dimmed. Then was a quick and bright flash as a large yellow star formed in front of them. It hovered directly above the battlefield and made a loud humming sound. They launched the star onto the battlefield, and it expanded as it passed through it, healing all humans caught in its light, and melted away any monsters caught in it, even the almighty Septarians, wiping out the entire monster army. Alexandra and her siblings flew down on the battlefield and declared the war over. Still in her butterfly form, Alexandra embraced Pines and kissed him deeply in front of everyone. The group returned to Thamor, where Mo was waiting to congratulate her children, and Alexandra then announced she would be marrying Pines and take him on as her king, and Pines simply nodded in agreement. The amount of forces and power displayed that day changed the course of history. Whatever kind of magic Alexandra and her brothers used instilled utter horror in the remaining monsters for generations. They would remain in terror for many decades after the three siblings pass, having only a few squabbles with humans. This period of low activity would be crucial for the future of human growth in the next century. Only after the humans were spread out over the continents, armies diminished, and ruled by a child did they gain the confidence to attack again. The Spell of Death. And that was part 2 of the biography of Alexandra the First Butterfly by a Mewni historian on DeviantArt. And heads up, if you want to know, there are going to be 4 parts to this, so we have 2 more parts to do. So I hope you all have enjoyed this biography. Hopefully we'll get to part 3 soon, and if you don't want to wait, go check out Mewni Historian on DeviantArt. See you guys next time. Goodbye for now.